And next up, we have got a new VTI for detecting BYOVD attacks. So this is the acronym for Bring Your Own Vulnerable Driver. If you follow ransomware techniques, you've probably seen this a lot in the past year. In fact, actually, Cisco Talos group team put together some solid research on how different groups have used this method. And you can see here a quick timeline starting from January 2024 and of kind of notable cases. And for anyone unfamiliar, this kind of attack is when attackers take a legitimate driver with known vulnerabilities and use it to gain, like deep access, deep control over a system. And since drivers run inside the kernel, that's dangerous. So the real trick here is that these drivers are signed by trusted vendors. And that means they are already verified as safe. But if they have a flaw, attackers can, for example, load the vulnerable driver onto the target system and exploit the flaw to gain kernel level access. And as we said, it can be dangerous. So they can disable security tools and making the malware execution undetectable. So previously, actually, we rolled out a Yara rule around this to catch some of the more common, BYOVD related files. But now we have added an extra layer so that there's a VTI so that we are flagging this earlier, let's say. And before we jump to the next VTI, of course, maybe it's worth mentioning that Microsoft has been doing something to tackle these attacks. So they kind of introduced a block list of known vulnerable drivers, which was originally part of Windows Defender application control and later moved into Windows Security in newer versions. So at this point, actually, I would like to turn to Patrick. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, on possible improvement with these block lists. And yeah, Patrick, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, so I really think that having this sort of block list is already a very good start, right? So, I mean, we all know that this bring your own vulnerable driver attacks are getting more and more often, or they're getting more and more frequent. So we see just more out of them. And it's also very easy for developers that if you just develop a new driver to add any of these security flaws, vulnerabilities, right? I mean, we're just human, that can happen, of course. The only important thing is that there is a frequent update also to drivers if possible. So as for this case, I totally think the block list is very valuable. That already helps a lot maybe in mitigating some of those techniques and attacks. But I still think that you have to consider the whole event or chain of execution to really understand whether this is malicious or not, right? So there is a lot of applications out there that unfortunately make use of those vulnerable drivers, even though the applications are completely legitimate and just being used regular, right? So just saying we are going to block this is good because it potentially adds some security risks to your environment, but it can of course also block some execution, some legitimate or valid execution at the same time. So considering this whole chain, like we are doing this right now, we have the Yara rule that's very, very low score. It just has 1 out of 5 to indicate that there is a driver being used in this analysis that at least is known to be vulnerable. And then we have the VTI that's has a slightly higher score of 2 out of 5, which indicates that this non-vulnerable driver we have detected via Yara rules is actually being loaded as well during the analysis. So those actions are suspicious, and we decided to go with a 2 out of 5 from the VTI score point of view, because it still can be used in legitimate applications, even though it shouldn't be used, but it still can happen. And considering the whole chain of execution or the whole chain of events, then of course VMRay platform can provide a proper score if there is something else going on besides just loading this driver to really end up with a malicious verdict if required. So we just say there is maybe some suspicious things going on because application loads this driver, But if there's nothing else, that it still could be fine, even though you shouldn't do that. But if there's anything beyond that, then of course we are going to also increase our score to flag the analysis as malicious to provide a proper protection for that.